I know you. You're that jaywalking punk anarchist.
Hello, this is the Radical Reviewer taking a look at video games that radicalized me. I was a pup in the 90s watching Gargoyles, Recess, Dinosaurs, Hey Arnold, Captain Planet, and from those shows I got pretty familiar with this archetype of fighting for justice, fighting against greedy, wealthy, corrupt bosses. And one can easily transfer this narrative onto the first video games I played growing up. Sonic freeing animals from a corrupt technocrat, Donkey Kong and Mario overthrowing corrupt monarchies? I mean, when you think about it, most video games, especially in the early 90s, were about defeating a boss. How can you grow up defeating bosses and not be skeptical of unjust hierarchies and corrupt authority? But to be honest, there wasn't a lot of narrative in the games of my early childhood. And what there was, I totally ignored, and I was a young pup, I didn't care about that stuff. That was until Oddworld, Abe's Exoddus. So probably my first experience being radicalized by a game was playing Oddworld's Abe's Exoddus with my dad. For those unfamiliar with the story, the Oddworld games basically take place in an alien world with these fat cat capitalist gluckins who exploit the Mudokons, who are a sort of noble savage type race. In this game, the gluckins have developed a new product. They make an alcoholic beverage out of the bones of dead Mudokons. They use Mudokon slaves to dig up the bones of their dead ancestors to be turned into a brew, which is then sold back to the Mudokons to pacify and control them. And so to beat the game, you have to free your fellow Mudokons and destroy the factory. There's so much to work with here. Of course, the noble, savage, native alien being pacified with alcohol as their ancestral lands and graves are desecrated by wealthy capitalists, it's very on the nose, very ham-fisted.
Once the Mudokons started drinking it, they couldn't stop. Then those gluckins told them that if they wanted to work, they could have all the brew they wanted.
Only if you got a job.
They fell for it.
Step right up. Oh, I love his job.
But as a little pup who'd never worked a day in his life, it was interesting to think about the extremes of exploitation that take place under capitalism. To think about the relationship between bosses and employees. To understand that the boss gains at the worker's expense. That the boss has a motivation to be corrupt, manipulative, to pacify their workers, to care for their profits over their workers' lives. I certainly hadn't thought about any of this, especially to the extremes that are presented in the game. You know, I hadn't read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair or watched movies like Salt of the Earth or anything like that. Of course, in this game, all of that's cranked up to 10. Hell, it's cranked up to 11, with the very murderous working conditions and armed guards that shoot you on sight and stuff like that. But it's not like those extreme conditions have never existed. In fact, armed guards and dangerous working conditions have always been foundational to capitalism. Whether it's the workhouses of the Industrial Revolution, the slavery of the colonial era, or the sweatshops and the mining of rare earth metals in our modern day. Anyways, speaking of The Jungle, let's talk about Oddworld, Abe's Oddysee. Now this is actually the first game in the series, but I played it second. In this game, the capitalist gluckins are running low on meat products. They're driving some of the alien species to extinction. We get a little environmentalist Lorax type vibes going on with this one. Anyways, so the gluckins decide to start using their Mudokon workers as a source of meat. And so again, you have to save your fellow Mudokons and destroy the factory. Maybe you've heard of the classic anti-capitalist phrase, capitalism is cannibalism, referring to the fact that capitalists devour the time, energy, surplus value, literally the lives of their employees, cannibalizing their fellow man. Well, in this game, this is taken to its logical extreme, actually consuming your employees by turning them into food. Now, playing this as a young pup, this was a totally new concept for me, teaching me about how capitalism is cannibalistic long before I'd ever had a job or read any theory on the matter. Now, recently, there have been remakes of both of these games. I played the remake of the first game, called New and Tasty. It was pretty fun. It's the same game, but it's revamped with completely new graphics. It's a fine replacement for the original. The remake of the second game on the other paw, this one called Soulstorm, is quite a bit different. The overall story is similar, but the layout in the gameplay is very different. For example, they cut out a lot of the speech options normally used for solving puzzles and replaced them with a scavenging and crafting throwable weapons mechanic. Right now, I'm totally stuck in this stupid part where you have to take out several waves of armed guards, all trying to shoot all the Mudokons you've saved up to this point. I'm literally pulling my fur out. It's incredibly frustrating. So, at this time, I recommend the original Abe's Exoddus over the remake. However, one interesting thing that they did add to the remake is radio broadcasts that play while you're on these, elevator things. It's like radio propaganda for the armed guards, and it's funny and well done.
A mass murder of the working class. Blocking bosses from other factories have come together in mourning for the lives lost in the fire, showing us that we can all stand together despite the outrageous actions of one lone wolf.
This is fake working class populism that people like Tucker Carlson engage in, telling the guards that the Mudokons who kill guards as part of escaping slavery, they're actually the threat to the workers, and not the capitalist Gluckin bosses who are controlling the entire situation. It's fun stuff, I love it. Anyways, next let's look at Metal Gear Solid. For those unfamiliar with this game, the gist is that some terrorists have stolen a nuclear-equipped superweapon called a Metal Gear, and you are Solid Snake, a super special ops guy sent in alone, armed with nothing but your support team contacting you over the radio, and you have to sneak past the guards, break into the facility, stop the terrorists, and save the day. But it's actually more complicated than that. When talking to the president of the Arms Tech Weapons Manufacturing Company, who you rescued from the terrorists, he explains to Snake that arms manufacturers are always waiting for the next war, about how they take bribes and they work with dark money in the Pentagon to avoid scrutiny, and that's how Arms Tech got the job for secretly making the Metal Gear weapon.
Secret projects paid for by the Pentagon's black budget. You can avoid a lot of red tape and get a great lead time on your weapons production. And no one can bother you. Not even those bleeding heart liberals.
As a young pup, I'd never thought to question the manufacturers of weapons of war. What their motivations might be. Later, after rescuing a scientist named Hal Emmerich, he explains that he was forced to work on the Metal Gear project, forced to make weapons.
I used to think that I could use science to help mankind, but the one that wound up getting used was me. Using science to help mankind, it's just in the movies.
Something like half the scientists in the world are working on military projects, something like that. Something I, of course, didn't know when I was playing this game for the first time. But through playing this game, I could begin to question the motivations behind what scientific projects get funded. Now, of course, the monologues from the various bosses throughout the game pose a lot of interesting questions as well. For example, at the end of the game, when fighting the main boss, Liquid Snake, who's the main terrorist and also your twin brother, and also both of you are clones, these games get really weird. Anyway, he asks you,
"Why do you continue to follow your orders while your superiors betray you? Why did you come here?" "Well, I'll tell you then. You enjoy all the killing."
This game is literally pointing the finger at you for enjoying the violence. Over a decade before, games like Spec Ops: The Line would start doing the same thing. Metal Gear Solid is supposed to be a sneaking game. There aren't many times where you're forced to kill in the game. But with this massive arsenal of weapons, why not do a bit more killing than what's warranted? And the game chides you for that, which in turn scrutinizes war and killing in the real world. The main theme of this game is genetic determinism. Liquid Snake, the main villain, your twin brother, he talks about how he follows his genes. They are his destiny and all that.
You can't fight your genes. It's fate. All living things are born for the sole purpose of passing on their parents' genes. That's why I'll follow what my genes tell me.
And yet after this, Naomi, a member of your support team, goes on a monologue about how your genes don't control your life.
You mustn't allow yourself to be chained to fate, to be ruled by your genes. Humans can choose the type of life they want to live.
Now, in the 90s, when I played this game, the concept of your genetics being part of your destiny wasn't really something I ever thought about, outside of, generic, nature versus nurture discussions. But I do wonder, How many of those alt-right, white replacement, identity Europa types, they were probably at the right age to play Metal Gear Solid. Maybe they would have been more skeptical of their genetic determinism, genetic identity stuff, if they'd paid more attention to the story of Metal Gear Solid. Anyways, this was followed by Metal Gear Solid 2. Now, y'all should have known this one was coming up. This game is amazing and almost predicts the way that the internet and the information age would come to function in our lives. Now, narrative-wise, I can actually just copy and paste my synopsis from the previous game. They are beat for beat the same. Some terrorists have stolen a nuclear-equipped super weapon called a Metal Gear, and you are Solid Snake, a super special ops guy sent in alone, armed with nothing but your support team contacting you over the radio. You have to sneak past the guards, break into the facility, stop the terrorists, and save the day. And again, it's actually more complicated than that. Of course, the biggest breakthrough in this game is the overall theme. Where the previous game talked about whether or not our goals, motivations, or aspirations are dictated by our genes, this game talks about the ways in which control of information can dictate people's goals, motivations, and aspirations.
In the current digitized world, trivial information is accumulating every second, preserved in all its triteness, never fading, always accessible.
Rumors about petty issues, misinterpretations, slander.
All this junk data, preserved in an unfiltered state, growing at an alarming rate.
It will only slow down social progress, reduce the rate of evolution.
Right. You seem to think that our plan is one of censorship.
Are you telling me it's not?
You're being silly. What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
In the end, the main character throws away dog tags with you, the player's name on them, rejecting the player's control. It's kind of a messy metaphor, but certainly an interesting way to depict our relationship with systems and institutions of control. It's good stuff. Anyways, moving right along. Metal Gear Solid 3. This one is a prequel to the entire series and takes place in the Cold War. It's got all kinds of great stuff in there.
Typical capitalist dog.
Okay, maybe not that specifically. That is funny though. Just like the critiques of violence in the previous games, this one has a boss who makes you walk through a river of all the people you have killed so far in the game, which is a really cool way to make you reflect on the lives you've taken, how many people you killed in what is supposed to be a stealth game. As far as overall themes go, where the first one talks about genes controlling you, the second one talks about controlling information controls you, this one is about scenes, or like the era, the times controlling you. About how the Soviet Union was allied with the US during World War II, but are enemies during the Cold War, but might be allies again in the future. At the time, in my real life, folks were talking about how the US funded the terrorists who would later become Al-Qaeda, that the US created the terrorism they were now fighting. So such a concept really resonated with how I was beginning to understand the world, in geopolitical terms. Speaking of geopolitics, Metal Gear Solid 4. This one had a confusing as hell story that I could not follow. But one thing that I did like is this concept of a war economy, funded through the military-industrial complex, private military contractors, and terrorist groups and proxy wars. I couldn't afford a PS3 at the time, so I didn't actually play this game until way later, long after I'd read books like Killing Hope and Overthrow or Phase of Imperialism. But I imagine that this story was very poignant for its time. For anyone who had been following the Dick Cheney, Halliburton, Blackwater, military-industrial complex using private military contractors to fight terrorist groups that the US was funding only a few years prior, all that stuff probably really hit home. Next we have Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. By the time I played this game, I was already done with college, and I had read enough about history and foreign policy to be more than familiar with the Dirty War period, which saw the military and the CIA and capitalists turning Central and South America into the home of overthrown governments, death squads, torture, and neoliberal free market capitalist experiments gone wrong. And in this game, you basically play as Che Guevara. This one takes place just after the third game, so we're still in the Cold War, But after being betrayed by the US, you decide to create your own private military force to fight for those less fortunate. And the CIA is trying to use Costa Rica as a playground for testing all kinds of military equipment. So you go in, join the rebels, liberate villages, kick out the imperialists. It's all pretty cool. The YouTuber The Cavernacle did a video a while back regarding the Che Guevara role in this game. Let's have a look at that real quick.
Snake, Kaz, and Amanda hold Che in absolute reverence and discuss how much they admire his struggle in Cuba.
So I hear Amanda mistook you for Che Guevara, Snake. That's not too bad, huh?
Yeah, right. I'm not even worthy of polishing his boots. No, he was more than that. He was a true revolutionary and a great warrior.
I don't really have anything to say about Metal Gear Solid 5, but I did play Metal Gear Rising, which also had an interesting story about government corruption and the war economy and all that. But I think you get the idea. What else did I play? Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. This one had corrupt cops. It had like members of your own gang were working with the corrupt cops, the FBI doing all kinds of crazy stuff. The YouTube channel Middleside Topwise covered a lot of this in one of their videos, so let's be super lazy and just pull from them.
Carl is blackmailed into doing all sorts of terrible things at the whim of psychopathic, imperialist middlemen, which eventually leads to the release of his imprisoned brother Sweet. Immediately on some revolutionary suicide shit, Sweet rebukes the family's newfound wealth and returns home to clean up the neighborhood.
What you mean, man? What's mine is yours, and you know that.
You never did get it, did you, Carl? I need to go check on things in the hood. Man, that's the problem. You always a perpetrator, running from what's real.
Hey, man, shit's fucked up there. You don't want to be in the hood.
No, that's exactly where I want to be.
Grand Theft Auto San Andreas tells the tale of dignified land protectors and the challenges they face as late-stage capitalism puts a stranglehold on their communities.
Oh, another franchise I really liked? Dead Rising. In this game, a zombie outbreak happens, and you're an undercover journalist who's on the scene. You meet all kinds of wacky folks along the way. Some of it's pretty tasteless, but still interesting. There's like a cult that forms, there's some security guards that take advantage of the situation and fulfill their sadistic desires by killing zombies and civilians alike. But after you uncover the truth, uncover the whole story, it turns out some company was experimenting with genetically modified cows. And they were doing it in a third world country in Central America where they could do what they wanted with little regulations or oversight or consequences. And, well, of course, their experiments created zombies. So the company covered it up by sending in the military to kill everyone. Wanting revenge and wanting to expose this imperialistic terrorist act, this guy from that country brings a zombie outbreak to the US, giving us a taste of our own medicine. Now, this might seem crazy and far-fetched, but look at something like the Bhopal chemical disaster in India, the testing of nuclear weapons, oil spills. History is full of examples of what is called environmental racism. Not only this, the revenge concept isn't new either. Many people refer to the attacks on September 11th as chickens coming home to roost. But of course, I didn't think about these concepts in this way at all, but kind of discovered them through playing Dead Rising. Coming up next, Dead Rising 2. Oh no, not another zombie outbreak in our franchise about zombie outbreaks. But unlike the previous game, this time the outbreak, isn't that big of a deal because there is a cure for the zombie virus. In fact, that's why your character was doing this crazy Thunderdome killing zombies X Games thing in the beginning, because you are trying to win money so that you can buy the prohibitively expensive medication for your daughter who is a zombie bite survivor. Wow, the game just started and we already have themes about how capitalism can force people into desperation, force them to do dangerous or risky things when their life depends on their ability to buy insulin. I mean, Zombrex. But wait, there's more. It turns out that because there is a cure available, there aren't as many zombie outbreaks, and that means not as many zombie bite victims. And this is affecting the bottom line for the company who owns the cure. And so it turns out, you find out at the end of the game, it is the company who owns the cure that has been causing the zombie outbreaks around the country, maintaining demand for their product. Now, you could take this into dumb conspiracy theory land, about how the elites all secretly have a cure for cancer and they're not sharing it. You know, I could throw up that meme about like, they feed us poison, we buy their cures while they suppress our medicine, that kind of thing. But I think this story does have something interesting to say about the motivations of capitalism. That disasters are good for business. Expensive insulin is good for business. Car accidents are good for business. Anyways, last but not least, Staircats 2. I never played Staircats 1, and I haven't got the third one yet, but Staircats 2 is totally a guilty pleasure of mine. You get to play as a member of a gang of hacktivists, using your tech and hacking know-how to pet dogs and take on the corrupt police and politicians and take on this corporate security tech giant. What's not to love? Anyways, I just think the medium of video games is really interesting. Unlike books or movies, it's interactive. It's an interactive way to tell stories about fighting for justice, about what's right and wrong, and teaching us about, well, justice in the real world. So those are a few of the games that radicalized me growing up. I'd love to hear about games that radicalized you, like down there in the comment section. Anyways, as always, I'd like to thank my wonderful patrons. Your tremendous support has allowed me to get dog insurance, which is wonderful. You've allowed me to support other creators I couldn't otherwise support, gotta love that. You've provided me with a little extra funds for books and dog toys and video games and things like that, which is really awesome. I appreciate you folks a lot. And if you like what I do here and you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/radicalreviewer. And if you're interested in radical theory or whatever, you can get your radical reviews here with the Radical Reviewer. Thanks for watching.
The Magog on the March. News for your blues. Warning, warning. Abe the Mudakan terrorist has infiltrated Soulstorm Brewery. Gluckin department heads explode. Oh, the horror. Even though brew production has plummeted, Mudakan slaves are disappearing left and right, and the toilets are backing up all over the place. Top management reports that everything is gonna be fine. I'm out of here.